another episode for you this week. Please like, share, subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and I hope that you enjoy this week's conversation. This episode will consist of topics around domestic abuse, domestic violence and sexual violence. If you require any support or help, please get in contact with your local domestic abuse, sexual violence organisation. In the UK, you can call the National Domestic Helpline on 0808 2000 247. And if you are listening overseas, please contact your national helpline where support, advice and guidance will be available for you. Welcome back to another episode of A Conversation With, and we are still continuing our journey with Claire Throssell. If you've been with us previously, you'll know that we've been following Claire's journey from how she experienced domestic abuse, the absolute devastating loss of her boys due to the perpetrator, and her journey on fighting systems that just are slow in response and were there or are there to protect and serve, and how often that they can fail in those times of needs. But Claire has used her grief to be able to make incredible waves across government policy in terms of law changing, and she also is an MBE. So let's listen into the conversation on her journey.
So my official title is Claire Throssell MBE, but I'd firstly describe myself as a grieving mum. Then I would describe myself as a campaigner. I would also say I'm now an author, and I can definitely say that I'm an educator on all things around domestic abuse. But mainly I'm at the forefront of the Child First campaign and lobbying Parliament and governments to change presumption of contact and repeal it out of the Children's Act.
Amazing. And I think what in this episode we really want to explore is what it means to create change, how long it can take, and also explore what that means for you as a human being. And as you said, the title that you don't want, but is very much the reality that you live, of grieving mum. So if you're comfortable, it'd be really good if you could take us back to what happened after the boys' deaths. Like, how did you end up being somebody that has been fundamental in changing such a vital part of legislation up until where we are today? I think that'd be a really interesting process for people.
Yeah, so in the aftermath of the boys' final farewell, there was this huge void, this huge dark hole that had ripped me apart inside. I'd had to deal with high-ranking police officers. I'd had to deal with the coroner. I was dealing with people that every day was coming to me with bad news. For a year, I was literally on the settee, holding on to Jack and Paul's blankets that still smell of them and putting them over my head when people came into the house, with the theory that if I couldn't see these people, couldn't see me and couldn't hurt me anymore. But obviously you can't stay in that position, and my mum played a hell of a role, because every day she would physically drag me out of bed, either by grabbing my nightdress or my pajamas, and she'd say, if you want to hide on the sofa, that's fine, but you don't lay down. You get up every day. You face the world. I don't care if you're hiding away, but you get up, you face the world. You don't let this lay you flat. And then everything felt as if I was nobody. I was trying to be a voice. I was trying to shout. But I felt like crumbs on a table, and governments and people like that were waiters that just used to get tablecloth and just brush the crumbs off the table. I felt like the crumbs that was just being brushed away.
It's a really powerful analogy, that, I think, that feeling of, even in that moment where you have lost your entire world and don't feel like you can get up, but it's still the fact that you recognised that's how badly treated you felt, even though you felt like nothing. And you wanted to be invisible. Knowing the injustice there is really interesting, actually, isn't it?
The first real sting, the first mistake the government made was at local level, and a guy came to see me because there was going to be a serious case review. And I'll always remember him because he was small and his feet didn't touch the floor, so when he was sat in a chair his legs were dangling, and he was sat there so patronising, saying, "Do you understand what a serious case review is?" And I'm like, "Yes." "And you'll understand it's been done about Jack and Paul?" "Yes." And I said, "But I'd like to raise the point that Kafkas was out of their timescale. I'd like to raise a point that social services were not involved when they should have been." "Yes, we'll be looking into that." I says, "And the officer that was barricaded in her office?" And he went, "Yes, but don't you think she's had a bad year?" Honestly, it's lucky I didn't get up off that chair and smack him, but victim support was in the room and she just literally put her arm out and stopped me from getting out of the chair.
That is unbelievable. That's not for you. Shouldn't have even been on the table.
No. And I should thank him actually, because he gave me that first spark of anger back. He gave me that anger for my sons because I'd literally just had them interred with my dad. And he's coming along and saying, "Don't you think the Kafkas officer has had a bad year?" That told me straight away that he wasn't on my side. He was on these organisations' side. And so much for being impartial, so much for doing a fair review. And I remember at the end of that conversation, I said, "And one thing more." I said, "You name them on this report." I says, "They are not a child A, they are not a child B, they're sleeping, they're no longer at harm. They had lives and you honour those lives. You call them Jack and you call them Paul." And he just looked at me and he said, "That's not how the government works." And I said, "I don't care how the government works. I'm telling you, they're my sons and I want them named. If this report's going into the domain, I want people to know who they are." He did the review and it came back and it was child A and child B. He'd completely ignored my wishes on that. And worse, despite me warning the Kafkas officer not to see him alone, because when he heard things he didn't like, he would get mad. Despite the fact she was barricaded in her office and she didn't escalate that and stop the visit going ahead, and despite me screaming from the rooftops and writing in my court application that he would kill them, the verdict of the serious case review was harm could not have been predicted.
Wow. But it's so common, isn't it? And it often feels, I think, for lots of families that it's a done deal and then that makes the review feel pointless. And it isn't. We know these reviews aren't about apportioning blame. But if we don't identify where there were opportunities to step in and hopefully prevent, everything stays the same. And I'm really baffled by not naming them. It's the perpetrator was no longer around, you were their mum. I don't understand the reasoning. I don't know if they ever gave you a reasoning for that. That's silencing in itself, isn't it? That no exploration around the reason we can't do this is because of X, Y, and Z. Or I don't know if it's possible, but we're going to try. But I don't want you to get your hopes up. And this is why. It's the difference in that communication delivery, isn't it? So from that point, you had that fire in your belly, even though obviously you were still in the absolute throes of extreme grief and very new grief. There's something in you that says not only is that unjust what happened to my boys, but there's something systematically wrong here.
Yeah, and I instantly wanted to challenge the serious case review, and the victim support worker said, "Unfortunately, you can't challenge these documents." And I said, "Says who?" And she said, "The government." And I was like, there's the word again, the government. I'm getting tired of people just flicking me away, brushing me off and saying, "You can't do this." Then we had the inquest. And even in the inquest, the boys didn't get justice because there's an ancient rule, and if you are not alive to stand trial for murder, then you can't be called a murderer. Therefore, his death certificate says suicide, not murderer, and on the boys' certificates, it says unlawfully killed, not murdered.
On a system level, that feels completely wrong, let alone on a human level. And I don't think, and obviously you are the expert in this experience, I don't think people understand how difficult it is. Those words, those small words, the impact and lasting impact that it has on families. It's just a word to people. the difference between murder and lawful killing. They're just words, right? But they're not. They actually hurt to the core. And I think that feels like some of the nuance that people don't get around this stuff, the clumsiness of conversation and communication, the difference in meaning for a word, what that means to making that sense of injustice concrete whilst also being on fire. I can only imagine it feels like there's fire burning in you, but so heavy to carry at the same time. It's not light like fire. But that must be have really compounded everything for you.
It did. And at that point, I was on the verge of literally giving up, because everywhere I turned, I was just being dismissed. Barriers were coming up. Kafkas wouldn't speak to me. Once they got away with it on the serious case review, that was it. The barriers of communication came down with them. Social services, they didn't even tell me if that worker had been dismissed or not. So I was walking around, and if anybody's watched the film, The Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, if you see this...
This audio was created with async.com.
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. If you see this boy who was a Death Eater, that's how I felt, because there was this calm, gentle, unassuming boy who could just turn into this black, whirling divish of destruction. And that is exactly how I felt. I could have at any moment broke down and just gone for the total destruction, because the blackness that was inside, the desolation and the sheer frustration that not just my voice but Jack's and Paul's had been silenced, that dehumanized Jack and Paul. And this is a 12-year-old boy who lost his life believing he'd saved the life of his brother, because I held him in my arms as he died and never told him any different. And they deserved better. They deserved justice. And at every point, there was no justice. The serious case review will never be changed. It will always say it couldn't have been predicted. Even though I'd screamed it from the rooftops, there was a collection together, walls came up and they protected their own. Then we got to the inquest and we got the coroner saying they can't even be called what happened. They can't even be classed as murdered. Unlawfully killed. Unlawfully killed is if you step out into the street and someone is not watching when they're driving, they hit you, that's unlawfully killed. Their lives were deliberately taken. And it was at this point that I'd done a few local radio stations, but then the community rebuilt the house, and through that we got some publicity, and it gave me that belief back in humanity. The fact that all these people came together, kept that circle of love from the church, from the final farewell. I wanted to give something back to them, and I wanted to make sure that Jack and Paul's friends wouldn't grow up to suffer the same way that Jack and Paul had, or that they wouldn't go on to have abusive relationships and there'd be nothing there to protect them. I was beaten down. I couldn't even look up at that point. I wasn't even thinking about rebuilding myself. All I wanted was to die and to be with the boys. And there still is that battle 11 and a half years later. There's times and I wake up in the morning and I'm disappointed because I've woke up. And I know that sounds awful, because I know people have got serious illnesses and they want to live and their lives are going to be ended. But this is a different type. This is a raw pain that never ends.
I think that is a very human reaction to your life experience and your extreme loss. And again, that's not necessarily what people see. And that's when we were speaking earlier about the need to see how people might perceive you now as Claire Throssell with the MBE, the campaigner, a woman who's changed the law, the reality of the struggle to get out of bed, or the disappointment that you woke up, or the amount of energy it takes to just keep going with this as your reality, I think often would go unnoticed. Not because people don't care, but because it's not really spoken about so much. I think we've tried in the other episodes, and it's as important here, to talk about the bits that people don't see or the things that we don't name in the negative, but also what you've just touched on there, like that support from community, that feeling that in it where a system has made you feel like crumbs, but then a community of human beings come together and make you feel like you're worth something, and then that you've got something to give back. And that is like how polarizing these experiences can be, and what a beautiful thing that they did for you.
And don't forget, I was already destroyed as a person from the domestic abuse. I was already feeling like a piece of dirt underneath the whole world shoe before all this happened, people and systems were already letting the three of us down when we were trying to leave, but that's a different thing.
But it's important, Claire, actually, that's really important, is that you're already in, it's the same in all other cases like this, isn't it? That you're already completely depleted, and you're already in that mode where you are trying to shout from the rooftops that your children are at risk, that you're at risk and no one's listening. And so when we think that's rock bottom, and then this happens, so actually you're starting from below zero, really, you're already depleted, and then that's why it's so much harder to get out of bed and rally. And without, again, it goes back to those labels, doesn't it, of you can't say murder and his is suicide. Again, these things matter for that reason, don't they? They all add to that weight of that you're carrying, that you're the one left carrying it, because he's not here, you're carrying it.
And the biggest weight of all is the fact that they only died because of me. They only died because he wanted to punish me. And we can't pussyfoot around that one. Yes, it was his actions. Yes, he decided to do that. But at the end of the day, it was because he wanted to punish me. And I carry that weight too. And also, the biggest weight is feeling like I failed to protect them as a mum. It's very shaming to know that you've not been able to be there in their worst moments, in the moments when they need you the most. I would have given my life for them, but he knew that, so he took theirs instead of mine. And I'd already been dismantled piece by piece. Their childhoods had been dismantled piece by piece, and I was building that back up. And it all just went, and it was like dust around my feet. But straight after the serious case review and the house was being rebuilt, Women's Aid got in touch. Now, I'd done the national newspapers because I didn't have a choice. As soon as I was coming home from the hospital, I'd not even got into the house and faced the house without the boys, and photographers were running up the side of my brother-in-law's car, just pressing wildly at the windows of his car to get photographs of me, and I was curled up in the back of the car. I had to make a speech because I was ambushed at the inquest. As I walked around the corner to go into the building, a load of photographers and press were there, and then I had to gather myself and speak to them after the inquest. So I had done press, but I was thrown into it. It was not a gentle local paper interview, it was full on national press. Even at the boys' final farewell, they were filming for the national news, and even when I was saying that last goodbye and my brother-in-law was there protecting my back, they were there filming it. So every point was public, and this pain that I had to hide was there throughout. In the January, after the serious case review, Women's Aid got in touch by the strangest of ways. Jack's old band, they sent a message on Twitter to say they wanted to speak to me. Could they reach out to me? And it was a rainy afternoon. It was awful. A dark January day. Matched my mood, really. And I went through to Sheffield. Two girls came up from Bristol on the train, and they said, we're going to meet you in this cafe. And it only occurred to me as I got off the train and started to get wet through with this pelting, driving cold rain, that I didn't even know what these two women looked like. They said they'd been sending me messages on the train. We've got tea, we've got meals. And I'm thinking, great, I'm ready for mine. And then I thought, I'm going to this cafe and I haven't got a clue what these two women look. But as I walked through the door, they must have known what I looked like. And they just stood up and gave me the biggest hug. And it was the first time I felt like somebody was actually seeing me, because family was handling me as if I was China. Daren't speak to me, daren't mention things, daren't talk about the boys because it hurt them as much as it hurt me. The boys were everywhere, but we weren't allowed to come together, and it split the family up because as close as we were all grieving in our own ways, I struggled with my mum because I wanted to lash out and I didn't want to hurt her, because the person I wanted to hurt was beyond recrimination. And that's another thing I've had to deal with. He never got any punishment for what he did. He just took his life, no consequences, gone. He had no intentions of facing what he'd done.
No, and that's another layer, isn't it, of what you have to carry. He left you with it all. I was talking to a family recently, a bereaved family, and having that exact conversation with them about what it means to be a family, to experience this, and how in their grief they were clumped together as like one. And although there's obviously trauma bonding and security in that, there's also resistance, and we're very different people. We've got different experiences of the people we've lost at the game. People say the family and or the mother, and we're more than those things, and we are individuals and we react differently. And people's expectations as well around grief, they expect tears often, they don't expect anger, or what's, as you said, people don't know what to say, so they say nothing, and that makes it incredibly difficult as well to be true to yourself and not then just bottle it all up.
Quite often there's a scream inside of me that never comes out, and the first time it happened, I could hear this scream. It had built right from the bottom of me all the way up, and I could hear it in my ears, and I'm looking around at people and their reactions were totally blank. So it was like, I'm screaming. No, is there only me hearing this scream? Obviously it's just me hearing this scream, because nobody else is wincing, nobody else is looking at me as if to say, what are you doing? All the feelings that we have internally, like when I held the boys, I just collapsed because I had too much pain to shout. I had too much pain to scream. All I could do was collapse because it was all consuming. And I think we all, like you say, grieve in different ways. But for me, I had to make a conscious choice to not hate the world and everybody in it, because the person I wanted to lash out at wasn't here. So I've always had to take a step back, a step out of a room to make sure that I don't hurt people around me. I don't say things to them that they don't deserve to be said to. And that's another layer that I have to deal with. But when we're talking about media, social media was incredible, because the day before Jack died, I was so fed up with the police telling me what I could and couldn't say. And my niece said to me, I can't tell you what to say on Facebook. And I went, what's Facebook? And she said, oh, it's a platform for people. So I set up a Pray for Jack page, and I wrote, the day before he died, I wrote my first ever post, and it received about 190,000 views. But it was a safe space for me, and it was a space to say the truth, how Jack was doing, because the police was just saying minimal stuff. And that page has grown and grown. I did a post 2 weeks ago about Jack's birthday, and it reached 475,000 views. But it's a page for me to be human, to be normal, to share the boys as they were alive with people. And when I met Women's Aid in this cafe, I got all of this emotion, this beaten down, totally. You think ground level thing.
This audio was created with async.com.
Beaten down, totally. You think ground level, think 20 levels below that. And it was an effort just to get on that train, just to meet them. And I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And they told me some news that really gave me some backbone and outrage, because they said they'd done a report between 2004 and 2014 to find out how many children had been murdered due to unsupervised, unsafe contact with known perpetrators of domestic abuse. And I'm sat there, half alive, half not, half listening, and then my ears pricked up, and they said 19 children have been murdered between those years, and the child 18 and child 19 are Jack and Paul. And I turned around to them and I went, they're not child 18, they're not child 19, they're Jack and Paul. And they said, use that then, become the front of this campaign, let Jack and Paul be the faces of this campaign, fight with us. And it was the first time I heard about Practice Direction 12J. It was the first time I'd actually heard about this nonsensical piece of legislation that said that judges would automatically presume it's in the best interests of a child to see both parents. And what hit most right into the chest like a sledgehammer was it had been introduced 4 months before I accessed the family court in 2014.
Wow, that timing, all of it, like the report. I'm so pleased that it was them that you met and that they made you feel safe and seen and heard. I remember, because I was working in this field then, I really remember that report from Women's Aid and put it in every single training that we ever did, quoting those statistics, because it was one of those that people just didn't, for the right, thankfully, hopefully in some ways for the right reasons, that had no exposure to like how fatal perpetrators can be. I always remember in a training room, like it just blew people away when you then actually went into the realities and the fact that it was court ordered, that people couldn't see that, because I think they presumed that when cases go to court, it's safe. And I think obviously the report subsequently, which we're going to talk about, shows what has and what hasn't changed actually in that time. I'm glad that at some point you met people that made you feel like you had value and purpose, and also just hugged you and said, here's the space that you can occupy if you want to, I think is the crucial thing, which is very different to a lot of the media that families get pushed into in immediacy after something hugely horrific. There's often a lot of media appetite and you do it because you feel like you have to. It's very different to making an active choice a bit later on.
And at this point I realised that actually I needed to work with the press, because if I didn't work with the press, then this campaign wouldn't be a success. I had to put aside the fact that they were running at the side of the car and desperate and death knocking the day after to get interviews, because the press was the only way that we were going to get the voices out there. Without them, we were just an organisation and one voice. So I instantly agreed that I would be the face of the campaign, and Jack and Paul's names would be in this report and would be in this campaign. And we launched the petition, and the very first day I was on BBC Breakfast, Victoria Derbyshire, Radio 4 and Radio 5.
That is some day from going from your experience of press to be chasing you in the immediate aftermath to then what sounds like you're saying is some choice to use the power of the press instead of that invasion that you felt, let's flip it around and let's see what the press can help us achieve, which is incredibly brave given those previous experiences.
I'm always very aware that I'm just one voice, and that voice sometimes can't be loud enough. It obviously wasn't in the courts, because my voice was at best minimised, at worst ignored. Jack's voice was never heard. Paul's was minimally. And I've always said from the beginning of this campaign that Jack's last actions that he chose to do, he chose to go back and help his brother. He chose, even though he was dying, to tell as many people in that property as he could the truth of what had happened. Those words, my dad did this and he did it on purpose. The police took that as his dying testimony, and I needed to honour that. And I'd made a personal promise to myself that my boy's words would be heard. And once the national press gets involved, then radio gets involved, and then the TV gets involved. And I've been lucky enough to do 9 documentaries that have gone out across the world. But on the back of that, people have contacted me from all over the world to say that they've seen the documentary or they're going through something similar. A couple of years ago, I believe it was a Scandinavian country, on New Year's Day, they changed their law and made presumption of contact illegal in their country. And the fact that somebody took the time to message me and say, I've watched your documentary and here in this country, we've just changed the law. To know that it's had that impact, to know that people have felt touched and moved enough to get in touch and take the time to message me, it means so much. I've got a map, I've got an atlas, and everywhere people's contacted me from, I've put a dot on the map. And there's not many countries where people haven't contacted me from, and it was my mum's idea, because abuse doesn't stay with the abuser, it stays with you. And I still have imposter syndrome. I still have hang-ups about how I look. When you've been told for years that you're ugly, you believe it. When you're told for years to shut up, you don't talk. When you're told for years that you're useless, you forget things, you lose things when you haven't, and they've just hidden them and put them back. I don't think you ever conquer that. And I've been in Buckingham Palace, I've been in Windsor Castle, I've been in Parliament, been in some of the biggest places in this country and felt like I don't deserve to be there. When I went in number 10 the first time, all I could hear was his voice. What makes you think you should be in here?
It's so powerful, isn't it? And I think it's, as you say, that's part of the legacy again that people don't see, that what you learn to live alongside it and to know that's what that is. And go, whether you say fuck off or shut up or push it down or ignore it, whatever people's tactic is, I don't think that it just disappears. I think it's living with that acceptance that it comes in, that some people would call it intrusive thoughts, but it's not really, it's them, isn't it?
We'd had all the interest, and then we were like push. So on social media, everywhere I went to give talks, I was like, please sign the petition. It was like a big boulder that just wouldn't move far enough And then about 7 months later, we'd got 44,000 signatures. And we took it to Downing Street. To walk down that street for the first time, all sorts of emotions. There were the press on the other side taking photographs, but for me, it was more Jack and Paul. All I could see was Jack's open chest as I was walking down the street. Paul just looked like he was sleeping, whereas Jack had got horrific injuries, and you can't unthink those thoughts, but who better to hold him as he died than his mum? I was the first person to hold him. I was the last person to hold him. But at that particular moment, I think because my chest was hurting, I was thinking about his chest.
That connection, isn't it? It's the biological connection that will never go, in a beautiful but also the heartbreaking way, that you recognise that connection in those moments where other people might be thinking something else. Other people might be thinking, this is groundbreaking, this is exciting, they've got adrenaline, but you're there. You're very much in that moment because that's how you got to walk down that street.
And this had been a dream to get this petition that far. Before we handed in the petition, we went to Downing Square and we placed a teddy bear for every child on those reports. So we put a picture of Jack and Paul in the middle, and then we put 19 teddy bears by the railings. And people, just because they were bears, even though they didn't know what was happening, they stopped. So people made sure they didn't walk in front of the bears, they'd walk behind us. Press were coming over from Downing Street because they thought, what's happening? And all we'd done was peacefully place 19 teddy bears on the path. If we went back now for the amount of children, it would fill the street. As it was, it only filled a third, and that felt bad enough.
I know that we are at the point of legislation change, but with legislation comes practice change, doesn't it? And that's what will be the driver, not the legislation itself. It'll be the practice that comes from that legislation, won't it?
Yeah, it will. But that day, when we handed in the petition, I thought, that's it, job done. It's going to go through, it'll be done. Oh no, that's not the process. So my MP initiated the first debate, and Women's Aid said, hang on, this is bigger than just the Practice Direction 12J. The domestic abuse bill, would you put court stuff in there with your experience? Because there was nothing in the domestic abuse bill around family courts. So I pushed for a ban on aggressive cross-questioning, which is what I suffered. Special measures that we didn't have to beg for, they would be there automatically. Legal aid, make it more competitive, because people were in this bear pit of family courts on their own, fighting alone. So there was all this going off, and they said the procedure is it has to go for a first reading, then it's debated at the second reading, then it goes to committee stage, and then it will have to go for a third reading, then it goes to the House of Lords, then it receives royal assent. And in the case of domestic abuse, this domestic abuse bill, we'd got it to the committee stage and Theresa May left government. So we had to start all over again. And dealing with that, it was like going down an extra 10 levels on an extra fast escalator down to the bottom.
Did you feel like literally start over again?
Yeah. And we'd had all this momentum, things were changing, we were going along, and then this great big boulder stopped. And no matter how hard we pushed, wouldn't go any further.
Is that something that you think, from all of your experience, obviously, for the last 10, 11 years in these spaces, that it is about individuals? It is about the will of an individual in the right place at the right time. From my perspective, that's what it seems like, when actually what we want is a whole.
This audio was created with async.com.
From my perspective, that's what it seems like, when actually what we want is a wholesale commitment to this sort of change that outlasts whoever is in power at that particular time, whether it's a particular prime minister or whether it's a particular political party.
Yeah, because in the Commons, after the second reading, it got cross-party support. No matter what party, they were all for this bill. They were all for repeal and presumption of contact. He was ready to go through, and Theresa May was booted out of power. So everything fell. And this massive flagship policy that was going to be the domestic abuse, suddenly there was a deafening silence all over again around domestic abuse. Suddenly governments weren't listening, weren't opening the doors to negotiation. And then I met Robert Buckland face to face. He saw the photograph and it really changed things. I got this meeting in Parliament, went in there, and he promised that he'd make sure it went through. So we started the whole process again, and then COVID happened. So with the first COVID, it fell again. And this time, I couldn't go out for a walk and scream in a quarry. I was literally confined. So I got as many cushions as I could, and I was beating the crap out of these cushions with my fists. And each time it was the world, because it felt, again, the whole world was against me. But there's one thing I've learnt, and that's when you hit rock bottom, there's only one way you can go, and that's back up. Whether it's zooming back up, which it never has been for me, it's been a case of shakily coming back onto the knees and then shakily standing back up again, and then walking like a weeble for the first few steps, and then stood up, back upright again. But that's because I've got good friends and family that pushed me back upright again. I've still got my amazing mum, who was like, if needed, she was there to give me the kick up the backside, the tough love, no sympathy, get on with it type attitude. And then in 2021, Robert Buckland had pushed the domestic abuse bill right to the point where it was going to go through for its third reading. And it went to the House of Lords. Now, we got the domestic abuse bill through, but because presumption of contact is under the Children's Act, they didn't debate it. They refused to debate it, actually. And I watched it on TV, and I was literally with my back against the radiator, because you know what? We can work our socks off and make family courts safe. We can make them fair. We can take away the fear. We can take away the degrading aspect of it. But if we don't change that piece of legislation, then outcomes for children were going to remain the same.
Yeah, it'd be different. What I hear from what you just said is very much, I know you're saying obviously you've got good friends and family that have picked you up from those bits of rock bottom, but there's also something in you that has faith in humanity over it that supersedes everything that's happened to you. The fact that you trusted Robert Buckland to, when you'd been let down previously and repeatedly, and that to keep pushing, that is something that I think a lot of families experience, but also possess, is that desire to keep going at all cost to them. Actually, this isn't without huge, enormous cost for you, but it does come back to that absolute trust in that there is something better beyond. Maybe not for you, because this is your reality, but for others, there has to be something better. There has to be better outcomes for survivors, adult and child. And as you say, those decisions rest on not having this presumption.
It's amazing what we'll do for our children, and I can't do things with my children anymore, but I can do things for them. And how could I go to where they sleep? How could I hold my head up and touch the stone if I weren't trying? Because all Jack did at the end of his life was try and think about other people. He thought about everybody else, about other than himself. And for me, I have to take that as a moral guiding post from a 12-year-old.
As a gift. It's a gift from him, isn't it? But it's obviously the gift that you gave him, but he gave it back to you in those moments. As you say, like that guiding torch of, if you feel lost, this is what you're looking for, Mum.
I say to young people now when I'm educating them, resilience isn't something you can be taught. It's something you can only find, and you have to find that from within yourself. You have to dig deep sometimes when you think, oh God, there's nothing left. And trust me, there's been many times I've sat on the floor with my back to the wall thinking, how am I going to get through the next 5 minutes? Never mind the next hour, never mind the day. There's times when I think, where am I going to get this from? Where is it going to come from, this well of extra to fight? And then I just look at a picture of my boys and I think about Jack and what he did. And if anybody deserved a medal, he did. So you square your shoulders, you get up off the floor, you keep going, and you put on a smile, because a smile is sometimes the biggest burden you have to wear, because a smile fools people into thinking, oh, she's fine, she's smiling, look, she's great. And at this point, I was literally on empty. Everybody was thrilled to bits because we got the domestic abuse bill. And I'm really proud of the part I played in that. I'm really pleased that I got to change part of that law. Lots and lots of people worked on it, but it was me that pushed through the courts bit and got courts included onto the bill. And I said to Women's Aid, I says, you know what, we can't let this go. And they said, what do you mean? And I says, we haven't got repeal of presumption. So yeah, we can make the courts better, but we're not making it better outcomes for children. So I left it a couple of years and I was tottering on, and I'd started building up a circuit of speaking at events and educating young people. I go around local colleges and I speak to them about domestic abuse and help them understand that how they feel in their heads and their hearts is influential as to who they let into their lives and the red flags to look for. I break down the strap lines, and I was going along but never satisfied. Everybody was saying, yeah, you've changed the law, fantastic, you're a law changer, but it wasn't the law that I really wanted to change. And I was still hearing in the news cases of children being murdered. And yeah, I've managed to change headlines. The press now are more mindful than ever of how they report on domestic abuse. My friend has just written a domestic abuse toolkit for journalists to use and access so that they know how to talk to survivors in an ethical, respectful way. But all the way, I felt like I hadn't fulfilled my promise to the boys. And then it was approaching 9 years from the boys, and I said to Women's Aid, look, it's the 10th anniversary and I'd really like to do the report again. We know more children have died, and since the Lords decided not to look at Practice Direction 12J, more children have died. So they said, to get it through this time, we're going to have to do it with 100,000 signatures to force a debate. So that meant we had to go from the 52,000 we got at that point to 100,000. And I said, okay, if that's what it's going to take to force them to debate it, then that's what it'll take. So I was back then, but the press were more than happy to get behind it. They understood what I wanted to do. A lot of reporters never forgot that day when they visited the house, never forgot interviews over the years. And we challenged and pushed. And it was 2 years of hard graft, trying to get these signatures, taking it out everywhere. By this time, technology had given us QR codes, so I'd print out a poster with a QR code on, and wherever I went, I'd put
Take it anywhere.
And people would say to me, how can I help? How can I get involved? And the only answer I would give was, sign the petition.
Because that's all there is. What we want is the amazing community spirit that you described in those early days and how people wrapped around you. That is what we need to have more of in the world. But actually, when it comes to something like this, the only thing that's going to make a difference is those signatures, isn't it? And that clarity of purpose for people is that you can help, and it's this way, and it takes a minute, if two maybe. It just enables people to feel, I think they can do something in what feels like a horrific overwhelming. When people know the reality, then they're like, I don't know how to help this because I'm either not the one doing the harm, or I'm working in a bank, I'm not working in the sector, whatever it is. And so it is challenging, isn't it? Whereas things like petitions, we can simplify it to engage people, can't we?
It was relying on people to sign the petition and getting people to understand what the issue is. And I'm going to say this, that it is not gender-based. It is about abusive parents. It does not matter if it's mum or it's dad. If they are an abusive parent, they should not have contact with their child. Presumption has no place when it comes to children's safety, and presumption has no place when it comes to children's lives. And I needed to make that crystal clear to people that this isn't a political thing. It's doing the right thing. And once people understood what it was, they did start sharing it. They did start signing it. In fact, when I was going out to do talks, conferences, they would say, is there anything we can do? I said, actually, can you circulate the petition on your work emails, in your networks, spread it out everywhere. And this really was the power of social media, really, because I got more signatures with social media than in the press. and I got Nottinghamshire Women's Aid on board, and they were taking it everywhere that they went. So every space I filled with the petition shamelessly. I was absolutely determined to get to the 100,000 signatures so it would be debated and taken to the House of Lords again. By the 10th anniversary, we'd got 110,000 signatures, and Women's Aid had also done a third report on how many more children. And the feeling when I read that report was a sledgehammer to the chest.
This audio was created with async.com.
Read that report was a sledgehammer to the chest, because on this third report, it was an exact symmetry to Jack and Paul's. There was 19 more. So that took the number of children that we knew of that had been murdered to 67. And I'd promised Jack and Paul, who were 18 and 19, that there wouldn't be any more. And reading that, they know there was a 3-week-old baby is one of them, a 6-year-old boy who died believing nobody loved him. These children had been harmed, they'd been tortured, but they'd been left alone to die. And for me, that is the biggest hit, that they were left to die alone. Jack and Paul died in my arms. It was me that held them, and they were wrapped in my love as they left this world. These are the children left this world alone, and that really hit. And when I was reading the report, the euphoria of, yes, we've got the signatures, now we can take it forward, balanced off to the report. And straight after that, there was yet another child, but we couldn't add it because her serious case review hadn't come out until after the report was published, and that was Sarah Sharif. And we must not let her just be a child A or a child B. We must not let her just go in a file in Whitehall and just gather dust. If anything is a pivotal moment, that is it. Because we are now at 68 children, and I always say 68 because I always include Sarah. So on the one hand, I'd got the signatures, achieved what I wanted to achieve that way. But on the other, I felt this massive failure that all these other children had died. So we went down Downing Street a second time, and the second time was no easier than the first because I was carrying all the extra children that again hadn't been named. They were just A's and B's on serious case reviews. I handed the petition in for the second time, but one of the police officers recognised me because he was there the first time that I handed the petition in. And he just said to me, keep going, it will happen, good luck. And I do think if we don't have hope, then what have we got?
I think that everything in our conversations over many months now and before, obviously, we've had conversations. I think hope is such a fundamental thread through it all. Hope that change can happen, hope that there's life beyond for others. I always think about that in the work that we do is, yes, people are experiencing the most horrific things imaginable, but what I want them to feel is hope, that there is life beyond this right now. Because part of me thinks, then if we don't believe that, should we pack up and go home? If we can't, well, why would people? Obviously, previously we've explored that, the challenges of leaving and how difficult and dangerous that can be. But it's for that, isn't it? That this shouldn't be people's lot. And I hear the pain in your voice, and I felt the same when I read the last report. I found that even harder in a way to read than the others because nothing had changed. It definitely took me longer to read it than the other ones, but it is the repetition of the failures and the repetition of the heartache that each individual family will feel around that. But I think there's also something really beautiful about the fact that you carried them with you into handing over that petition, including Sarah, that there is that someone, even if people didn't carry them in the last moment, someone's carrying them then, and that we commit to the change that is required to ensure there is the change that's needed. And now it's not going to change overnight. We know, sadly, that there will be more cases, but with the presumption of child contact ending and what hopefully will come after that in terms of the push around change of practice, we will, in the next 10 years, see a change. And that's what we hope for, isn't it? That's what we're doing it for.
Yeah, because if we don't have that hope, then what is going to change? We need that hope to drive that change, and always believe that a better future will come. 68 children never had tomorrow, they only had today. But with this repeal coming, they will get a tomorrow. And it's not just the children at risk today and tomorrow, it's for generations now to come.
And that's what legislation does, isn't it? And that's what often is so hard for people to see, is that it's not about us, it's about beyond us, it's stepping beyond us and what we hope we're creating safer futures. And I think that is what you have and always do when you talk and share your experiences so well, is compel people to think outside of themselves and their own lives. And that's what it really takes to challenge domestic abuse and to end it, hopefully, is think beyond yourself and think outside of what your life experiences are. Just because this happened to you or didn't happen to you doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Think beyond what someone's telling you and question that curiosity. And I think that's what you've done so well, is pushing people to open their eyes for Jack and for Paul. And that's why we are where we are now, that we're just on the brink of it, aren't we? Just on the brink of it coming.
On the cusp.
Have we got a date?
Not yet. So on the back of handing the petition in and the 10th anniversary of the boys, the government made a pledge to look at presumption of contact, and in conjunction with the harm report that they'd not responded to for 4 years. So the government made a pledge and a commitment to continue that work to look at presumption of contact. Now, I'd started to write a book about Jack and Paul and domestic abuse and the journey through the whole time. And I was writing thinking, this announcement's going to come. This announcement's going to come. And I got fed up of waiting, and I'd finished my book. So I issued a challenge to Keir Starmer at the end of my book, and I asked him basically a question. Did he want his government to be the next government in a long line of governments that continue to fail children in the family courts? Or did he want his government to be the government that made a brighter, fairer future for all who suffer from domestic abuse? And I had the opportunity. It's funny how these things work. The stars must have aligned, because just before the book was about to come out, which was near the boys' anniversary in October last year, a massive TV programme called This Morning invited me on. And whilst I was on the sofa, I was fed up of waiting for this announcement, and basically challenged the government live on This Morning to respond and tell me what the outcome was from the inquiry into presumption of contact. They told me in April that year that they had reviewed presumption of contact and a statement would be coming shortly. So when I went on This Morning and they'd contacted the government and they'd said, oh, an announcement is coming, I responded with, yeah, I've heard that since April. And literally a week after that, on the boys' 11th anniversary, Sir Keir Starmer invited me to Number 10 and met me in person, and he looked in my eyes and promised that he would repeal presumption of contact. It would be taken in entirety out of the Children's Act. But here's the thing, it should never have been added in the first place. It wasn't in the bill, it wasn't in the Act when it was written, and nobody should have allowed presumption to be included in a bill that's supposed to protect children's lives and children's futures and children's rights. It was almost a full circle moment, because the government back in 2014, if we unwind all the conversation, they were trying to flick me off, trying to brush me off, trying to ignore me. So was CAFCAS, so were social services. All the doors were shut. And in 2025, there was Keir Starmer looking at photos of Jack and Paul, talking about Jack and Paul, and naming a law about Jack and Paul. From being an A and a B on a serious case review, and that serious case review will be gathering dust in Whitehall. What hasn't gathered dust is their names. Their names is still bright their names still shine bright. And it's a building of a legacy that's taken nearly 12 years. It'll be 12 years this year. When Jack had his birthday in March, he's now reached the same milestone as Paul. They've both been sleeping as long as they were alive. And that is a wound, a cut that never heals. It's there on my arm, and I pick at it sometimes, but it never scabs over. It still bleeds, but it bleeds internally. It bleeds inside. And to have them mention the repeal and the fact that it's now gone into the Courts and Tribunals Bill, and it's had its first 2 readings in Parliament, which I sat through the second reading, 9 hours, and then the committee stage, and I've given evidence to the committee as well. At this time, I don't feel like I could have done any more, and that's the first time in nearly 12 years that I can say that. For years, all I've been able to say is, I'm trying. It's a system that's broken. It's a system that we can't fix. But for all the people that said to me over the years, it's a long time till presumption of contact will be taken out of law, I don't see it actually being done. It's going to happen this year.
What a milestone. And as you say, it feels that full circle, and it's so nice to hear you say that's how you feel, that you feel like you've done enough. And I hope that there is going to be some time for you outside of this as we've got to this point, but that will take some thinking about, obviously. I know it will, because it has been your life's work. And so let's watch this space, but it does feel like it's going to happen, or it is going to happen. And the impact of that, as you say, is for generations to come.
This audio was created with async.com.